Hello there, hi, welcome to Butterfly Effect, a podcast all about interviewing people. I'm your host, Tristan Ettleman. Thank you for coming back and listening. This is the second week in a row we're back. After the episode with Max last week brought the show back from being out of action for a few months. Go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. It exceeded my expectations. It's now the most listened to Butterfly Effect. Not that it's a competition, but it was very graciously received by Max's fans because he shared it very nicely on Twitter a couple times, and it got a bit of traction there, and it's done pretty well by my standards. So I appreciate all of you that have listened to it, and if you're still here, thank you. By the time you're listening to this, a big event will have happened. It'll be my 3-year anniversary with my very beautiful girlfriend Haley, and that's a big life event. It's something that I'm very happy about. We've moved into a place recently, as I mentioned in the last episode, and things are going well. That's the word on that. This week on the show, I talked to Anthony Gallegos, podcaster, game developer. You probably know him from the Comedy Button, his work on Marvel Heroes, and his work at IGN for those things. And it was a great conversation. As I'm speaking, I just concluded the conversation because this is a quick turnaround episode. And it was a good one. I feel like covered a lot of ground, and hopefully that reflects well in how the conversation went. Talked about, podcasting in general and the nature of journalism, which is a recurring subject on this podcast, and being decent to each other. That was another theme of this episode. So I'll let you listen to that. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you on the other side. So what's new with you? You're working on Marvel Heroes and all that stuff, doing Comedy Button, obviously, and how's that stuff coming along for you?
It's coming along well. We're working hard on a bunch of big changes and just trying to, I don't know. It's a really cool job. It's tough working on. I guess it's interesting working on a licensed game just because it's rewarding in a lot of ways because you get to work on something that millions of people cherish, especially Marvel things.
Yeah. It's
also tough because compared to other games I worked on where we were making up the ideas on our own,
right?
It's not like I can be like, and now Spider-Man's gonna fly through the air, and it's like, no, Spider-Man doesn't fly. It's just getting used to working within a framework. It has both its positives and, maybe creative constraints at times.
Sure. Yeah, and I imagine Marvel Heroes, I mean, it's continuing. It's not like you're finishing the project and moving on. It's a long-term project.
Yeah.
In terms of supporting it and adding new content and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, working on any game that's a living product is totally different from shipping a box thing and being like, all right, we finished. There it was.
Yeah. Yeah. How long has Marvel Heroes been going? How long have you been working on it?
Marvel Heroes has been going since 2013.
Okay, I was going to say 2012 or 2013.
I actually did a video for it while I was at IGN.
Oh, wow.
In 2012. Funny. So.
Okay. Was it in beta?
I went to their studio, and because they were in the Bay, and went and did a demo with the then CEO David Brevik.
Right. Yeah, I heard he had left.
Yeah. It's crazy looking back on that. The company's changed so much. They used to be above a Kmart, and now they're in a real. It was so weird. When I pulled up to their office, I remember back in the day. I remember thinking, "There's no way this can be the right place." But
you got the wrong place.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. It's such a cool game, and there's I know a lot of people play it and enjoy it. So.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I feel like we do. We're trying to make something that it's a tough game to work on because you're trying to make something that's appeals to people that like games like Diablo and hardcore action RPGs, but you also want it to be approachable enough that someone who goes out and watches Civil War and says, "Man, I wish that I could go play as Captain America," can like try and do that, right? And any sort of action RPG with like multiple powers to use and stuff. It's just interesting going from, like, if you're designing Call of Duty, you're not worried about usability. I feel like you're just like, we know Call of Duty.
Yeah.
And in this game, we're always thinking about like, how can we get a few more of like the people who have never played a PC game to like try it out, you know?
It's that license thing that you mentioned earlier that just you have a good intersection of audiences, I would assume. So
right, it's like you would never see a Star Wars shooter that was like Arma or something like that.
Right.
They know that Star Wars fans are going to want to play it. So not that like
that would be cool though, a Star Wars Arma type game.
And it's not to clarify, obviously, it's not that I'm saying that any of these people are like dumb or anything. It's just that they may not be. They're not necessarily the people that pick up 20 games a year and are like, can immediately swap between an Xbox controller and a PlayStation controller and a mouse and keyboard and be comfortable, you know?
Right.
It's easy.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
I was just saying, it's easy to get, tunnel vision when you're in like a world and culture of people that play games like so much that you're like, oh, of course this is easy. And it's like, no. Like, it's really telling when you bring in someone like, even like executives at our own company who aren't really, like, they're money people or something, and they don't play games, and then you see them, and they're like, how do I do anything? And you're like, okay, this is very good to tell me that we aren't doing, necessarily the best job with certain onboarding and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, what are you specifically doing there? I guess I never really...
I'm a designer.
Okay.
I work mostly on... Like, I'm not a level designer. I work on, like, heroes. So, like,
That's awesome.
Like, when we make Green Goblin or when we made Blade. Blade was, like, a character that I was like, oh, I'm going to go watch, read a bunch of comics and
that's awesome.
Check out Blade and figure out what Blade should do. And so I start with, like, the literal paper design, as we call it, where you write down, and then I actually build it as well. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So, I mean, it's interesting because you have a kind of, I think, a similar kind of career path to some people working in games, working on games. But how did that all start way back when? I assume you played a lot of video games as a kid.
Yeah, I played, I guess, I think my first memory playing Nintendo was like at a family member's house, and my earliest games I played was an Atari because my mom used to be really obsessed with Miss Pac-Man. And
awesome.
So we had an Atari like 2600 in the house, and we had definitely played some of that. And then at one point, our grandpa gave us an old IBM computer, and we used to play a bunch of like 5-inch floppy disk games like on that, like Kung Fu and stuff like that. I want to say something similar to that. And I played X-Wing on PC as the years went on. I definitely did a lot of PC gaming at first because we always had a computer, but it took us a while to like get a console.
Sure.
I feel like it was maybe a little bit harder sell for my parents to want to throw down money on something that wasn't like useful for work as well.
For everyone, right?
Yeah. So definitely did a lot of like X-Wing and a lot of flight simulators, and I would say it was probably around... it probably wasn't until, like, I definitely kept on playing games through the Super Nintendo era, but it was mostly, like, me and my friends would get together and play Mortal Kombat or hang out and stuff like that, and but I was still doing a lot of other things. I would say my life balance was much more broad at that time. And then...
As I found it is for a lot of people that in this world, in this tunnel vision world.
Yeah, it's like... When I was in junior high and the first couple years of high school, I would say I actually played far less video games.
Yeah.
Because I was super convinced I wanted to do like skateboarding for a living, and was doing that with my friends, and we'd always play video games. Like when we'd get done skateboarding, we'd always retire and play video games. But then it was like as we all started realizing that we probably weren't ever going to be professional skateboarders because it's really hard and you get hurt.
Yeah.
Video games definitely became something that we played a lot more, and we started making friends, too, that weren't into skateboarding. But, like, video games was always a really common ground for us.
Sure.
So that was, like, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64 era is when I say, like, I'd probably got, like, much more wrapped into it. And that's when I started to have a job and money that I was making on my own. So all of a sudden, like I could, by the time the PlayStation 2 came around, that was like the first console I was like, oh, I'm going to go buy this like relatively right after launch with my own money. And then like that's really when it happened. Like went to college, PlayStation 2, got way deep into games, started playing EverQuest as an MMO. And then after that, it was just
floodgates were open.
The floodgates were open, yeah. We always had every console from there on out,
Yeah.
Always tried to have like a good computer, and that was really how it launched into me being like, I want to keep up with this all the time.
Were you reading magazines? Because obviously at that time it was mostly
I was reading magazines. It's funny to think about that by then IGN would have been around. Because 20 years, so they would have been...
Yeah, exactly. It's 20 years this year.
Yeah, so they would have been around for a little bit, but I wasn't really reading IGN. I would occasionally check out GameSpy, I want to say, back in the day. And, mostly magazines when I would think about picking them up. Definitely picked up issues of Game Informer, like probably everyone back then, because you just couldn't not get a subscription to Game Informer.
Yeah.
And really and honestly got me into like the whole path to going down like the website route was actually... it's funny because a lot of people, I've seen like people on the internet give my friend Arthur Gies, who works at Polygon, a lot of shit saying that the reason he got his job was because he lived with me and stuff like that, which is not untrue in the sense that like I helped introduce him to people. That's totally true. But I, in a lot of ways, in hindsight, would not be doing that job if it wasn't for Arthur, because Arthur was the one who introduced me to like 1UP and these websites and got me interested in actually like I hadn't even really thought about the whole path of like writing or looking at games in that way. He was totally into that, and when we worked together, he kind of introduced me to that, and we started our little website together where we actually used to write reviews and he'd lay them out and stuff like that. And leveraging that was actually kind of what ended up getting me an internship at 1UP and then a job, and so it was really kind of, I guess we both helped each other out a lot when it came to that. So
yeah, it's that kind of stuff's always, I'm sure, frustrating here, because it's not like I've talked to people about. It's not like he's taking a spot or something, that there's some like limited like number of spots that people can, and it's like that, and that's the only reason why he got it, was that he knew someone.
I mean, to be fair, there is a limited number of spots.
Sure.
Like, there are probably more people that play in the NBA than there are people that like make a living off writing about video games. But
sure.
But it really like in the end, I could introduce anyone to someone over and over and over again. But if they suck as a person or as like a writer, they're not going to get it. You know what I mean?
They're not going to care. Yeah. That's, and so much now though. Even if there's limited spots at these certain places, you have so many outlets, other outlets to go through, YouTube and all that stuff as well. So that's what I kind of was referring to in terms of that. Like, if you really want to do it, just do it.
Yeah.
No one's stopping you from creating it.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, what helped me and Arthur. We started our website. Nowadays our website's literally just like a landing page for the podcast. But back then the web page, like, we even had like a web comic we used to do. We had reviews. We had all the stuff we were doing, and we started doing a podcast out of my bedroom and putting it up for like 10 people a month or something like that.
Right.
And it didn't matter because we were just doing it because I was like, this seems like the best way to be doing it. And I was also writing free reviews for like another website.
Yep.
That would just like let me...
This sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah, they would just let me keep the games and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this because all this is resume building in a way.
Right.
So that if something ever happens, I'll go see about it, and
yeah, it's just the hustle is the important...
The hustle, yeah. There's like I'm trying to remember I can't believe I'm spacing on my friend's name right now, but some of the best people I know, like, there was kids I met, like, I knew this guy, Alex Rubens. I think he works at Riot now, but he worked for that. Prior to that, he worked for Red Bull. Prior to that, he did freelance for IGN. Prior to that, he was literally just a kid who found a way to go to E3 and then met people. And he was just such a good little hustler that, like, the minute you met him, you were like, man, someday you're going to take one of our jobs. Like, you just knew it, like, immediately. So, yeah.
It's cool seeing those kinds of guys come up now.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, and
I mean, I guess that's always been happening, but for some reason I'm paying attention to them.
Yeah, well, you can even look at the current staff, like Masthead at IGN, like,
Yeah.
Like that girl Miranda that works there was like a random person that came to like one of the Beyonds.
Goldfarb was a big fan, I know, before.
Exactly. Like a lot of these people were just, I mean, even Greg Miller, who's now on his own, started off as just a fan. You know, like that's how it was for me when I worked at 1UP. I worked there because I listened to Games for Windows like podcast and 1UP Yours and I was like so like, you know, starstruck by all these people, and you know the goal was to be able to be a part of that. And so, you know, like it's crazy that like doing things like going to meetups and parties and stuff like that, it actually does help, because in the end all the people that you want to work with are just like other people. So sometimes just getting to know them makes a big difference, you know, like this guy James that works at IGN in the video department was a Comedy Button fan with the podcast, and he and I ended up hanging out in person at one point, and then after that it just kind of ended up that when a job came open I just was like talking with him. So it literally is just a lot of times like meeting people and not being like a total shithead and being nice.
Right, being a weird like I'm in touch with a lot of freelancers in the industry and such, and seeing like and editors for that matter, and they like post just like the weirdest replies to like pitch rejections and stuff like that. It's like you are going about this entirely the wrong way.
I mean that's a bad way in general. Like
any job, anywhere.
Yeah, especially because like people's lives are so public. You know, I'll never forget that when I did work at IGN and I worked with Greg Miller, that there was a guy who came in, and this wasn't necessarily like an immediate like you're screwed moment, but the guy came in and Greg sat down with him in the interview and was like, so why did you tweet out at one point like everyone at IGN sucks a bag of dicks or something like that? And the guy was like and just didn't have a good response, right? And so it's just like the point is that, you know, it's very easy to feel insignificant on the internet and feel like no one's paying attention. But if you're like putting yourself out there, you know, especially for like a job, people nowadays, it's easier than ever to find like your dirt.
Right.
So it's best to make sure that there's no dirt. That's what I guess.
Yeah, just positive attitude. It sounds cheesy, I guess, but it's, I mean, if you can handle rejection well, you can and show that, I think you're better set off than a lot of the people.
My second week working at 1UP, I remember I had to write like a wrap-up story of the Nintendo press conference, and I put it in the content management system, the CMS in the back, so that it could be edited by someone else. And one Ryan Scott, who now I did the Comedy Button with, was on it, and I remember his response that he told me about later was to someone was like, who hired this guy and why did we hire him? You know, it's like that was like someone that I've ended up becoming friends with, but it was like so bad. And then like another one of the editors at IGN, Sean Elliott, who now works at like Arcane in Austin.
Wow.
He sat me down and would like redline the crap out of my stuff and sit down with me and tell me why. You know, so it wasn't like, even after I ended up getting my foot in the door, it wasn't like I was like in or so great.
Right.
Like, I had to sit there with people that were going to tear my shit apart really brutally, you know, and explain to me why. Because the bottom line is that everyone, for the most part, like has like really bad writing habits, especially if like, where you think you learned to write was in college. Like college does, I think, like a good job of teaching people to write maybe like literature type writing.
Or academic stuff.
Yeah, but even academic stuff, colleges put page counts on things, which I feel like for a lot of you know, kids who are on a deadline and trying to get stuff done results in passive voice and wordiness. Make sure they hit a page count, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like I could probably edit down most 10-page college papers into like 2 pages, I bet. Just because people using the most verbose language they would never use. So just learning to write like you talk is like a skill that I feel like is really hard, and college didn't teach me. You know, I always got A's on papers in college and was like, I know how to write. And then I started writing with people who like had to fit an entire review in 500 word count. And I was like, I don't know how to write at all. So.
Yeah, I'm doing this as a freelance gig. I'm writing these short things in very short characters. And that's super tough. But it's like I'm seeing like I'm doing it for work, but it's also a really great writing exercise. You know, like I get like 75 characters to describe a whole thing.
Yeah,
And that's great.
It is, yeah. I mean, when I worked at One Up, and the EGM was still owned by Ziff Davis, and a lot of the print stuff I did was like, EGM at the time would do like 3-person reviews. One person would get like 200 words, and then everyone else would get like 90. So it was like you only had 90 words.
90 words, that's insane.
To say everything that you needed to say about like a Call of Duty game, so.
That's like 8 hours long and has multiple modes and
so
stuff.
You'd get like 2 sentences about multiplayer and 3 sentences about the campaign, and like that was it,
Yeah.
And you had to convey that without sounding just like a robot saying it is good, it was bad,
Right.
So.
Yeah, print is interesting because you literally have inches to work with, and I kind of regret that I never got to experience like print games writing and stuff because I think that's kind of an interesting legacy.
I mean, talk about like limited positions,
Yeah, definitely. I just love the stories about like E3 1998 and stuff like that, and the print.
It's a very different world in the sense that like the first year I was even at EGM, we were still doing print stuff, and I remember it was like all the print people would go to E3. And then they'd take the week after E3 off because
right.
They didn't have to turn anything in.
Can you imagine that now?
Yeah, like then when I joined IGN and went to E3, it was like we're up every morning till 2:30.
Yeah, it's live shows. It's literally as it's happening or right after. So and I remember I'd heard that too. Like they would take a week off or something, whatever, because they had a long deadline for print.
Yeah, I mean, even Game Informer, when they go to see a cover story, it's like the game usually comes
Sure.
there, and then they don't think about that game for like, I don't know, like they have like probably like a month to read it. So it is still kind of insane that they get all the time that they do.
Right. So what was the coming up on the writing part of your interests? Were you writing a lot of stuff outside of like, schoolwork or whatever as a kid, high school, college and stuff?
That's just it. I really wasn't. I, after college, worked a lot of jobs, none of which required any writing. I didn't really start doing the writing until we started our own website, and that's when I started doing more writing, and Arthur started editing my stuff, and and I guess I was doing like the really truly free freelancing for handheld websites and stuff, and that was how I started practicing it. And honestly though, if I really am truly honest with myself, I was like never really wanting to do the writing. Like I liked the writing, and I not to say I didn't come to enjoy it, but the reason I wanted to do it was because I wanted to do things like the One Up show, and I wanted to do One Up podcasts, and I just wanted to be a part of that world. And if I had to write to do it, well then I'd write. But it wasn't like that wasn't like necessarily like what I was really drawn to initially.
I think that's a common sentiment.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah, and the writing became something that I was much more into as time went on. But it was actually kind of maybe a good time for me to join when I did, because that's when so many things were transitioning to video and whatnot. Anyways, so that
podcast
that provided a lot. Yeah, I mean, I was still there when IGN was writing much more heavily than they are now. So
yeah, that was even only a few years ago.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like 2012 E3, like I was probably writing, a bunch of stuff every day, and nowadays I see my friends there, and they're like, yeah, I just did a few videos, and I'm like, all right,
yeah,
it's just a very different world. Like when I applied to IGN, they wanted writing samples, and I imagine nowadays, like they probably do want writing samples, but I know that they also ask for like, give us a link to your YouTube page,
Right.
So it's like it's just a different sort of thing. No one. I remember when I worked at IGN. No one was expected to be able to talk necessarily. Like I know that's weird, but it's true. Like when we started doing video reviews, they actually brought in a voice coach for all of us to like teach us how to like enunciate. Like, I'm sure you can even listen to the way I'm talking now, and then if anyone were to go dig up an IGN review I did of a video, it's like a completely different voice that you turn on. You know, it's like Mark Summers from Double Dare and Unwrapped and all that stuff. Like, he doesn't talk that way all the time. But, you know,
it'd be great if he did, though.
But he goes into that enunciation, speaking clearly and slowly thing. And that's the same thing we had to learn to do, you know, redelivering lines in a VO booth over and over and over again until it was like, you know, at the right cadence and attitude.
Right.
So it's just
I probably need that.
It's a skill that takes practice, but
yeah,
that's the nice thing about, you know, editing is you can sit there and botch a line 100 times and then someone cuts it all together. But yeah, I mean, nowadays, you know, people are looking for that mix of ability to write with also the ability to talk to people and the, you know, the ability to be likable and
be a personality is, I think, the term for.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing. Like, people would ask me all the time, like, what's it like to be like you were in the press, and I was like, I never really considered myself, you know, a member of the press. Like, I always thought calling ourselves enthusiast press was like a kind thing, but I always viewed it more like as a critic, you know. At some point, Craig, when we worked together, would always call himself a critic, and I was like, that's more accurate, because we're not like you know, like Siskel, like, and Ebert, like, they weren't
journalists necessarily.
Yeah, they may have written articles that appeared in a newspaper, but they were critics. Right. No one called them press. They weren't expected to, like, you know, I don't know, like, very little of the news writing I ever did at IGN was like me digging up a story the way that someone like Vice's Patrick Klepek does. Right? Like, that guy goes, and Jason Schreier over at Kotaku, like, they hunt down stories and track down sources, whereas a lot of the news writing I did at IGN was, oh, look, I read this thing on another website.
Right.
Now we'll kind of translate it.
Or a press release, or, you know.
Or a press release, right? So that's why it never really felt like press tracking down anything, you know.
Definitely.
My job was to go to Ubisoft and play their game and come back and write about how it was, which is much more of a critical thing.
Right. It's so hard to do that with games. Like, I admire those guys a lot because they do incredible work, but, like, it's hard to replicate that across multiple instances, you know, with the whole industry, because it's inherently, you know, access based.
It is.
It's not.
Yes.
It's not about. It's not like we have a public records right to, you know, Ubisoft's, you know, upcoming games or whatever. You know, like you can do with a governmental story or something like that.
Yeah, no, it literally comes down to the fact that Patrick and Jason have built contacts at E3, at PAX. All these people that they've befriended, and people that have come to them that want their story heard, and will specifically, like, you know, because, like, it's not like, you know, like, the thing is, like, sometimes I get annoyed too when I read a story and it's like an unnamed source says blah blah blah.
Sure.
But all these websites like Polygon and stuff, whenever they have a source, even if it ends up being anonymous on the website, they force the people to identify themselves pretty clearly. Like, they don't write something just off of, like, a tip, you know.
Right, yeah.
Usually it's like it starts with a tip, and then they're like, well, how do I know this is real? And the person will be like, well, here's a photo of me with my badge at the studio, right? And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, there's multiple steps of approval to, like...
And then double check that with other sources.
Exactly.
That.
So it's like, by the time... That's, like, why when, like, Jason Schreier says something like, No Man's Sky is getting delayed, and people are like, yeah, no way. And then all of a sudden it's true. It's like, yeah, because they do their homework, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a total rumor mill. And... But that's what I mean. That's journalism right there.
Right.
Like, hunting down things and stuff. And, you know, that happens very little nowadays because, honestly, like, you know, like, I'm thankful that someone's paying them to do it. But financially, it's like, if you look at what Jason did, hunting down all those things, putting up that story probably did really good traffic. But, like, if it had never come together and a story hadn't come out of it, the man hours he put in it, it's like...
Right.
Like, whereas, like... You know, I guess it's tough because in a world where someone else is doing the journalism, I would wonder if we could see the records. How much did Kotaku make out of originating that story and putting it up as a written piece, and how much did IGN make by making a 5-minute video where they read a script in front of a camera and recounted that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
and it's like I bet you IGN probably made more money, and that's the struggle. You know, like I don't mean to be like I guess I don't mean to be all like cold and calculated and just bet
sure.
who made more money, but the bottom line is that a lot of these companies like have overlords and stuff that are like they are for profit, and so a lot of it that's why you see so many more videos and stuff like that, and that makes it all the more challenging to justify journalism. When you're like, here's one story that I put together over the course of 2 weeks. And it's like, or you could have done 25 videos, and so it's tough.
Yeah,
it's really tough.
Well, that's a struggle for I think journalism in general, not just for games,
totally,
but
yes.
for any other kind of entertainment medium, or the important stuff, as I like to.
Well, even like
the actually important stuff.
Even CNN, right? It's like, you go to CNN and it's like they have a story about Israeli leaders. Right now, I'm literally looking. Then there's a story about 65 tons of chicken recalled, but then the next story is like a Kardashian-Jenner spat over a party. It's like even CNN, which used to be like this, like, one of the leading news services in the world, and I'm sure they still are, they all the time will post pictures like, can you believe this horse is doing this? And you're like...
I know. Like the Facebook and Twitter, like, attempts by, like established places kind of saddens me a little bit.
Yeah.
It just kind of cheapens the medium, I guess.
Yeah, it's like I think we all have this romantic notion of like someone like
Woodward and Bernstein.
Yeah, or like the journalist out of like the Daredevil Netflix series.
Sure.
Like someone that's like hard boiled, sitting in an office late up
right.
night trying to crack stories. And I'm sure there are those people at CNN.
Yeah.
But it's tough because it's like, hey, there's this one guy, or woman who's working on a story for like 6 months, and it comes together, and it's this mind-blowing thing. But then there's also the intern who posted 3 videos that he found off YouTube and reposted about cats, and he made more money. And it's like that's the struggle. That's really the struggle of justifying continued like deep journalism, because it has to be about prestige as well as money. Like even at 1UP back in the day, we struggled with that. Like we had people that were making videos and stuff, and they were like getting good views and stuff. And then we would have these long form features we would do. We'd call them cover stories, and those weren't really doing that well for us. But we kept doing it because we felt like the prestige was there, and publishers liked seeing that on our site. So it's like it's like tough. Not everything can be measured in money. Some of it has to be measured in like what it does for you and with your audience and stuff like that.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it's tough, any of these places. I mean, they're all these websites and stuff like that are struggling right now. Like, I'm not saying that any of them are like, I have some insider knowledge.
Right.
Like, when I was there, IGN would talk about its biggest competitor was websites like Wikia and stuff, which is obviously not the case anymore. But it's like IGN's biggest competitors now is probably like people on Twitch and people on YouTube, and it's like and it's just like all these websites that are so ad-driven, I think, are really struggling to figure out how to make that work in a world where there's not only ad blockers that are really good, but also just, like a written article mid-roll ad is like worth like probably 1/20th what a video ad impression is.
Sure.
So it's like, how do you get more people to watch more videos? That's always going to be the most profitable thing. So it's just a struggle, man. I don't know.
It's depressing. As someone who's currently going to school for journalism, it's depressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll always be there, right? But
sure, of course.
It just comes down to what will it look like, and
it's changing shape as we speak.
Yeah, and at some point, like, I don't know, will the IGNs of the world, like, I feel like Polygon's a better example of how I could see things going, in the sense that, like, I don't know ultimately if Polygon's viable long-term future either, because they're ad-based as well, but it's like, but Polygon has a lot of people spread out all over the place working from home. And so, like, I feel like that's maybe like an example of what that could look like, in the sense that, like, IGN has, this gigantic office, and it's in downtown San Francisco.
Yeah. And
it's just like, creating all these overheads and stuff, and I just don't know. Yeah, I'll be curious to see what journalism really looks like, I mean, it's, you and I, we live in a depressing time where, we just kind of hear about newspapers closing and magazines closing, and So,
or being purchased and folded into that happens all the time. Like here in town, a local news channel was folded into like the local CBS affiliate, and they're the same like company owns both of them now. And it's just like stuff like that is happening everywhere all the time.
yeah,
So.
yeah,
And then I'm part of the problem because I don't watch local news. I don't give a shit. But it's also sad.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if it's part of the problem or if it's just that I'm sure it was really depressing for people as the Telegraph died, But it's
right.
but it's like things do move on. Like we have to come to
they will get better.
Yeah, we have to come to terms with that. Like there was a lot of people who lost their job on the railroad when planes blew up.
Right.
But it's like I don't know that it is sad to see things that are institutions.
But we shouldn't have kept the railroad just for the sake of feeling better about ourselves.
Yeah, the railroad still serve a vital purpose nowadays, but it's not like the primary way for transportation, right?
Right.
Just like if someone invented like rockets that we could fly across the world in, well then we'd be doing that instead of planes. It's just like progress. I mean, even like robots in factories, right? Like they build cars more efficiently, so now they replace people. It's like, I think that that's sad and that's like harmful in a lot of ways. But I bet you, like someday, if we don't blow ourselves up, that'll mean people have more free time. And it's like, So progress definitely comes with a lot of like hard costs. And the biggest thing that I think that people can do about that is to not be blindsided by it. To see that coming along the way. And so that's what I mean about these websites like IGN trying to figure out how to find that ad revenue, but it's like, at some point they have to find a way to get money outside of ads. I think actually a site like Giant Bomb is actually a great example of that because they cover a lot of their overhead by just getting subscriptions out of everyone every year, which is weird because in a way that's like decidedly old school. It's like an old magazine subscription, but
it's coming back around.
Yeah, it is in the sense that
with Patreon.
Exactly, yeah, you can literally pay people to be like, I like what you're doing, and now people, if you make it easy enough for them, they will do it. And so, I haven't visited Giant Bomb with ads on it, like ever, pretty much, because I've always just paid a subscription. So. I feel like maybe that'll be the way to do it. But Giant Bomb also has a staff of like 10 people.
Right, and a very dedicated, smaller audience.
Whereas like IGN has like probably more than double that on just their video teams.
Right. Oh, you're talking about who works there, right?
Yeah, like staff. Every individual staff member costs a lot of money. It's just like health insurance and everything else. Like it's amazing. When you try and hire people, I think the reason I think about money sometimes in staffing is because once you work on a game project too, if you sit down with a producer and you start laying out like, here's the headcount we need to make this project a reality, and you find out, and here's how many man months we need and stuff, and it's like, well, you immediately see it jump up into the millions of dollars, like, and you're like, man, we only put like 10 people on this, and it's like, nope, it's now millions of dollars,
Wow. Yeah.
So.
Wow. Okay. So that was inspiring stuff.
I mean, like the bottom reality is that all these jobs and stuff are really cool, but I think the hardest thing for me to learn, and something that OneUp didn't do a good job of teaching us, like they were very cagey with details about like how site traffic was, and so like it was like literally when we all got laid off, I felt like it caught so many of us out of left field because I thought we were doing great. And the site, the truth is, the site was never doing great. It had a very dedicated fan base. Had they gone for like a Giant Bomb style thing back then, maybe it could have worked. But it's just like IGN was great for IGN was a really amazing company for helping us see the business side of things. Like they never hid details from us. Like here's how things are going. Here's how much money we're.
That's awesome.
And it wasn't like they told us where the ads were coming from because they kept that separate to avoid conflicts of interest, but. They just always wanted us to know, like, here's why we encourage you to do a video, and so it was very interesting just to understand that aspect of the business and to be aware of it,
Yeah.
I mean,
So what was the timeline of? Because were you at GameSpy, on OneUp IGN, or was it?
It was 2007. I joined OneUp.
Okay.
2009, I joined GameSpy. 2010, I joined IGN. And then
So GameSpy was like where the briefings are kind of the proto comedy button, right?
Yeah, like when I joined GameSpy, one of the things I was tasked with when I joined was starting their podcast up, and so, that's kind of how it started, because it was just meant to be this silly thing or not a silly thing. It was supposed to be like a game show that I did with my friend Ryan and Scott, and then we just started grabbing random people from the office, because GameSpy had like a staff of like 4 people, and yeah, it just kind of changed into what it did. And honestly, it wouldn't have happened and changed into a thing where we took it into our own hands had it not been for the layoffs that happened in 2010. So that made me an IGN employee and stuff like that. So that kind of forced our hand with, and it's good that it forced our hand, because honestly, that show didn't really have a place at a
major outlet.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah. I mean, it was in a lot of ways too crude or vulgar or any number of things to be on a website where they discourage swearing and stuff.
Where they sell ads and do stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So then the IGN, you seem to be speaking very, favorably about your time there.
Yeah.
How long were you there again? 2010 to 2013?
Yeah.
Was it 20?
I was there 2009 to 2000. Well, I mean, my time at GameSpy, part of IGN, because
sure,
we were all in one office.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was 4 years, and the 3 years that I was specifically at IGN itself too were yeah, they were good. They were tough. It was a lot like IGN. They definitely like work harder than probably any other group of people. And that's kind of why I think they're still like up there, because I mean, maybe not as much now. Like, I'm not saying they don't work hard now, but I'm saying that when I was there, that was still in the like IGN literally has a review for like every video game.
Every game.
Yeah, it was just so crazy. But nah, IGN had a, honestly, I was like a begrudging joiner at IGN when I first joined, like, because I came in one day and I was just told that now I worked for IGN.
Yeah.
And I was like, like they write multi-page reviews and do all the stuff that I thought was really like kind of stupid. And, that attitude of mine kind of changed over time when I started working with the people, and I was like, oh man, these people totally know what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
And I totally grew to like it in the team, and yeah, I mean, very little of the people I worked with are still there, but
yeah, it was that period you're referring to is probably when I was most dialed in.
Yeah, it was
IGN specifically.
It was a good group of people, doing a lot of good things. I'm sure the people that are in there now are good too. It's just that, yeah, it was just a interesting little 4 year
different time. It's weird that like 4 years feels that long ago. Like 2012, that's not that long ago. But also when I think of specific things, and of course this specific thing, it feels like a very different world and time in that.
Yeah, it
space.
is. It's like writing about games and stuff is fun. It's hard to make a living at necessarily forever, especially once you start having kids and stuff. Just in the sense that it can be a very time-consuming thing. I'll say that like when I worked writing about games, I brought my work home way more than I ever did making games. So, that's a tough thing that takes some getting used to for a lot of people. And eventually when they start having kids and stuff like that, it can definitely become a little tough. Not that people don't do it. There's obviously people out there like Jeff Gersman and Steve Butts at IGN and stuff have been around for a long time, and they make it work, but I just, for me, it was just that moment where I started realizing that, I just wasn't sure that that's what I wanted to do forever anymore. Like, after 6 years, I was like, this is fun, and I still really enjoy it, but I'm like, in another 10 years, is this where I'm still going to want to be,
Right. Yeah, I've heard it described as a great way to, spend your 20s, because that's usually the age that people at working in it are. And, and then it's a springboard to other things as well, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think everyone jumps into development. People jump into all kinds of things.
Sure,
but if you wanted to jump into development, there's basically almost no better window into it in the sense that when I joined up to do writing and stuff, it was never my intent to get into the game development. But the reason it works so well is that, especially at a place like IGN, I was doing so many appointments, meeting with people constantly, and so I just ended up with like even today in the game dev world, where someone's like, oh, hey, does anyone know someone at this studio or something like that? I can almost always be like, yes, I have a friend there that I can immediately hit up. Yes, I know their PR person.
Right, PR, I was going to say, you know a lot of PR people.
Yeah, I know a lot of PR people, but I also know plenty of developers because I got to know a lot of producers and designers. So it's just, that's honestly how I got my game job in development was I was friends with the creative director of Zombie, and he would come down to show me games, and we got dinner one time, and I just kind of joked that I was ready to move on from IGN, and he asked me what I'd wanted to do, and then before I knew it, it was like a job interview, basically.
So Zombie was the first gig out of games writing.
Yeah, it was. I joined that studio because they were in a really good place when I joined, like really poised to potentially go on and do really amazing things, because they were getting ready to do all this self-publishing and stuff, which is something they basically hadn't done in like 20 years. And but yeah, it was. I don't regret joining that place. I think it was a really good learning experience for me.
Yeah.
But it was also really rough in the sense that, like, basically in the year that I was there, everything kind of fell apart,
Yeah. Well, it sounds kind of weird, but from listening through Comedy Button, that record you guys have, basically, it sounds like you kind of learned a lot about the other side.
Yeah.
Of games.
Making games, it's like every game that comes out in a way, especially I don't know if I've never worked on a AAA game. I feel like a lot of those AAA games are so produced that it's like not as surprising that they come out because there's like just so
they're too big to fail.
Yeah, and in some ways, it's like there's just so many people working on them, and like they have like an army of producers and stuff.
Yeah.
At Zombie, I think we had like 2.5 producers basically, and it's like and we also were working on like 3 or 4 games at once.
Right.
It's like, everyone there had to wear so many hats that, like, I really realized that, like, it's a miracle a lot of times that any of this stuff functions and, like, comes out.
I think about that all the time.
Yeah. It's like sometimes it blows me away. Like, Zombie, I think what it did is open my eyes to a lot of things in the sense that, like, I'll be working at a studios or I'll have friends working at other studios and they'll be like, yeah, we just estimated this game we're going to make. We think the budget's going to be, like, 20 people, it'll be like $20 million to make, and it'll take 3 years. And I was like, dude, a Zombie, we would have made that in like 12 months, like and we would have done it on a $2 million budget. Like, I don't know, just like they were a very scrappy studio, and I think that was like super valuable to learn from, because the games that I worked on didn't end up being like super great, but they were made in like 10 months on a really hard schedule, and it taught me at least really good lessons about having to make compromises and what compromises to make, and also just like it was like a crash course in making games. Like when I joined, I didn't know how to do any scripting or anything, and like basically like 2 weeks into the job, they were like, "Well, you need to start scripting these things," and I was like, "Okay," so trial by fire.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was almost like when you hear about people that are like, the way they learned to speak Spanish was to a Spanish-speaking country, and so I didn't know anything about game development, and then they were just like, all right, you're here, and the game already has a milestone schedule, so you have to make that happen. So I just had to make it happen. It was very good for learning.
Yeah, that's great. And then obviously we've talked about Marvel Heroes and Gazillion is the company, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking of a different company, but Gazillion is right. And it sounds like it's a much bigger team than what was going on at Zombie.
Yeah, Gazillion and Zombie. Honestly, Gazillion's probably not that much bigger than Zombie.
Okay. Interesting.
Like in its current. I mean, to be fair, it's probably like, I'll say it's like 30% bigger than Zombie. But Zombie was like 70 people, but like half of those people worked on private contracting jobs for like.
Huh.
That we had what was called our serious games division, which was like a whole 30-something people at our studio that worked on nothing but, like, projects for the government. Like, things no one would ever play, you know?
Whoa, that's cool.
So it'd be like, simulators and stuff like that.
Right, I was going to say, like, simulators for military and
so
stuff like
it's
that.
like, but it sucked because, if you were a person developing those things, you didn't get to necessarily show it in a portfolio.
Right,
but,
yeah.
But yeah, that was part of the way that studio stayed afloat was, it always had its army projects and stuff to fall back.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, and then, of course, we alluded to it earlier, but Comedy Button spawned kind of out of Game Spider briefings and those kinds of friendships and stuff like that. And, I mean, it's, what episode count is it near? In the late 200s now?
Yeah.
A few years later?
It's like 220, I want to say. 200.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, it's a big legacy already, which is kind of strange to say because I remember starting to listen to it however many years ago. But
yeah,
I mean, you guys reference the fact all the time that it's a silly, very silly show.
Yeah. Well, when is this podcast going up? Do you know?
I was going to post it probably tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I can cut this out then.
No, it's fine. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Yeah, the Comedy Button's been going on for, God, what is it? 6 years now? 6? 7? 5? I'm not sure. 5 years? It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It all kind of spawned off of that layoff, and it was something that, I'm very proud of. We started things like Kickstarter and...
Yeah.
Or we didn't start Kickstarter, but I mean, it's like it was like the first Kickstarter. Like, I feel like we did
Yeah, you guys were early on Kickstarter.
That's what I mean. It was like before games really took off from there. Like, I had never even heard of it. Scott was just like, I know this thing called Kickstarter, and I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? and so, like, I feel like we did a lot of interesting things there, just with the show over the years, like trying to find ways to have it supported and stuff. And yeah. I'm really proud that it's gone on so long after, like, just being something that was kind of started on a whim.
Yeah.
And that people have connected with it as much as they had over the years. Like, I feel like it's always, like, a little bit cringing. Like, it makes me cringe a little when, like, someone tells me, like, I just started listening from episode 1, and I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. Like 5 years ago, I was not the same person I am now. It's just, like,
yeah.
It's like I feel like we've all grown so much, and I think anyone that goes back and listens to that, they kind of hear that as things change. It literally is, like you said, kind of like a record there,
right?
Where you can like trace down things like see when someone lost their job, see when
which has happened a lot to all of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, job turnover, people getting engaged, people getting married. All those stories are there within that, which is pretty cool. That record sort of exists of that amidst things that I'm sure someday our kids will hear and be like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like,
have you thought about how you're going to address that at all? I don't know if you plan on having kids. But...
I mean, I'll not try and hide anything. It's the same thing with employers. Yeah. I've had employers Google me and they're like, they find things. Thankfully, I work with something like making video games, where generally the people are generally they kind of just laugh about it anyways, right? So I've been very fortunate that, well, I feel like I've put myself out there, and there's plenty of like shameful pictures and all kinds of dumb stuff. I think none of it's like so bad that like people like. I think people quickly get to realize about me that it's all just there for just being silly. It's like
It's in the name, Comedy Button. It's comedy. It's not like you're.
Yeah.
There's videos of you murdering people, or something. It's like nothing like awful.
It was always done with no mean spirit behind it. So.
Right, exactly. That's another thing about it. It's not mean spirited at all.
Yeah.
So it's just being silly and the show has a really. I mean, the podcast is one of my favorites, by the way. So thank you for that. But also, it has a weird kind of rhythm to it that I think. Even when things get kind of over the top, you still don't feel like it's. Mean spirit or anything.
Yeah, Scott's done a good job of editing it, I feel like, too. Like,
yeah, you can't even tell it's been.
Yeah, and he does some editing, and also like we've been very fortunate to be in a place too where like I feel like there's like 3 or 4 episodes of the show that probably never went up. Like, that's the thing is like we do get good rhythms. Occasionally we get total duds. We had a few duds that we just were like, well, we're never posting that. Like they're just sitting somewhere on a hard drive, So it's rough recording something like that and then stopping and being like, all right, we're going to do it all over again because
because it's conversation. It's like it's
there's
kind of
no
hard
plan.
to recreate.
There's very little plan. For a while there, I was definitely trying to plan things and get topics together and stuff, and that just never seemed to work out right. So, most of the time I just try and interject with something random and see if the other people will kind of take it away. Cause, I'm not as good at like riffing off something random as some of the other guys are. So
Brian and Max are.
Yeah, they got like the brain of a child, and I in like the most delightful way. I mean that.
Sure.
Like in the sense of like, kids will be like talking to you about sand one second, and then the next second they're like talking about space, and then they're telling you about their cat, and it's like all one continuous sentence. Like,
right.
Like a lot of people lose that, and Max and Brian, I feel like, still have
the
ability to tune into that part of their brain, which is like a rare and good thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's funny that people kind of have assigned roles to you guys, which is kind of strange, but also
it's not untrue though.
No, because I guess people kind of see you as because you kind of you host the show and you're kind of trying to corral the other cast members and stuff like that. But
I do end up playing a bit of the straight man. Which is funny because like I feel like when I do Rebel FM, which is like done with people that are much more straight men than me, on that show I'm not the straight man.
Yeah.
But with Comedy Button, it's just because I'm with people who are just like so whip crack.
Just exceed you even.
Yeah, they're just really fast with their jokes and stuff, and they're very good at taking it to weird places. So we definitely have roles that we've kind of fallen into, but that's fine. I like that never bothered me. It's just because I was like, it's what works. And sometimes, like, when people ask me, like, I want to make a podcast, how do I do it? It's like, sometimes it's just about finding what works for you. Like, I mean, we've even had shows, I feel like we might have even had shows that maybe, like, we thought about scrapping and stuff, and it wasn't because it wasn't funny, it was just because it was like, man, we had people on there that were just all, like, competing with each other, and I don't know, it's just like, you have to find the right chemistries to make a show really work right. Or else it'll just struggle for a long time.
That's something I was kind of talking about with someone on Twitter recently. The biggest thing that a lot of podcasts struggle with is the competing nature. We didn't put it this way, but now that you say that, that's totally what we were talking about. That the chemistry is so important to a podcast because that's all it is. It's the conversation, And generally, podcasts aren't planned out to a T.
Right. It's like Giant Bomb. They're very good conversational podcasts. And it's because you can tell everyone in that room not only knows how each other joke around, but they also like respect each other a lot.
Right.
And sometimes it's like, even with me, it took me a while doing Comedy Button to get used to being interrupted and to get used to knowing how long to let something go for and to let people just play with an idea. Like those are all things that take a while and aren't immediate. Like, I didn't even know Max before we started recording Comedy Button. I met Max.
That's pretty crazy.
For the first time when we recorded our first episode of Comedy Button, because Scott was like, I know a guy, he'll be good for this. And I was like, all right, if you say so. So, it's just like, you really have to take a time to get to know someone and to also, understand them enough that when you interrupt them, they're not going to like, sit there and be like, well, I'm not going to say anything, but I am hold that against you for the next 2 weeks. So it's a struggle, but it's like you can tell when a show has, I think, people that know each other well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the main. I think that's the main thread in all the podcasts that I enjoy is that everyone knows each other, and the respect part of it is interesting that you mentioned that, because it's not like I'm necessarily thinking all these people respect each other, but if you look at it, that's kind of what's happening with just the natural flow of a conversation like that. That's being.
They may not even respect each other, but they have enough decency as a person to like not act like they're like Fox News anchors or something like that. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
like it's just like I've definitely had people on shows I've recorded that I did not like, and you could probably listen to it and never tell that I didn't like them, and
Yeah.
but that's the point, right? It's like if I'm there like recording a show, the point of the shows I record is not to like tear someone down or something like that. You know, the point of the show is to make something that hopefully people can listen to and enjoy, and so like I feel like that's the sign of people that also just kind of understand it sounds preposterous to say, but I guess there is some craft to it, right? And so
of course there is.
it's like Terry Gross on NPR is like an amazing interviewer.
Amazing, yeah.
All right, and it's like and I know she's interviewed people that she didn't like because I've listened to some of those podcasts, and sometimes they get kind of rough. Like if you're curious, she interviewed the lead singer Kiss, and that was like the weirdest one I've ever heard her do.
I mean, anyone interviewing Gene Simmons, I feel like would be awkward or uncomfortable in some way.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, well, he was just saying things like basically like she needed to get, be with a man so that she could, just like total like crazy like shit that like, but she took it in stride, and it was like, it was like to her character in the sense that like maybe she didn't necessarily respect him, but she respected her audience enough.
Sure, it's a job. It's
exactly
be professional.
Exactly,
yeah.
And so I feel like while the Comedy Button is hardly serious, it was certainly something.
I don't know. I think it's Terry Gross NPR level quality.
It's certainly something that, it's hardly serious, but it's certainly something that, especially once we started making money at, we wanted to make sure that we were producing something that we felt like lived up to a standard all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It wasn't okay just to put something out because we did it. It had to meet our criteria, which is like why I said we definitely had episodes where we had a guest we thought would be awesome, and then it totally was like crap or something like that. And so we were just like, that's not good enough. It was a weird thing to say, like, this is not good enough, but we've done it. So
yeah. Well, I respect that, and it's interesting that you mentioned Terry Gross because I was just like looking at Mark Maron's interview with her. I don't know if you're familiar with WTF, his podcast, but he's also just I kind of modeled this show after his because and that's a very different cadence and kind of situation he has when he interviews people, but they are very similar in the same way, and that they're just both fundamentally very good interviewers, I guess.
Yeah. No, having someone that can get people to talk is very important. To your credit, you've done a good job with it right now too. So
thank you.
Yeah, no,
wasn't fishing for a compliment, but I appreciate it.
No, I know you weren't, but it is a tough thing. Like if you don't know someone, right? Like even when I started to get on this call, I was like, I've never talked with this Tristan guy. Like I know what he's going to be like.
Well, and it's weird because I have listened to so much Comedy Button, and I feel like this is something that people have talked about. People will get this kind of assumption that they know you,
right?
When they don't, and I always go into it thinking this is another person. I know things about them, but I don't know them.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the show, they probably understand certain parts about me.
Sure.
But the thing is like, they don't know me because we've never talked me and them. You know, it's like
there's a disconnect.
Yeah, I told people this. I remember I alienated some people because, like, I just have a different attitude than, like, someone like Greg Miller, who tells everyone that they're his best friend. And I'm like, and I specifically remember saying, like, I'll say it again, like, people that listen to my show are not my friends. Like, they are people that are part of the audience, and I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm not saying they couldn't be my friends, but for now we're not friends because I don't know you. That's the big thing. It's like, I love that you know things about me, and that's really cool. And then, like, the fact that you want to support anything I do is, like, so rad. But it's like, until I know you, I don't want to say that we're friends, And
right.
And some people, I think, maybe feel sad about that because they feel like they know me really well. But hopefully, if they really do know me really well, they'll know that I mean it when I say, like, well, hopefully that doesn't mean that we couldn't become friends.
Right.
Like, there's a guy, James, that works at IGN who literally got that job by being a Comedy Button fan. We ended up hanging out in person. We ended up talking on Skype all the time, and now we, like, he's like the fourth chair on Rebel FM. It's like all that happened because he was a Comedy Button fan that I had just got to know. And so it's like people definitely – I have real life friends that I text on a regular basis from Comedy Button Facebook group and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say you guys have a great community there on Facebook, and it kind of fosters positivity, stuff like Submission Sunday and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
cool.
I just feel like it comes down to, getting to know people and realizing, I guess I think to go back with Games for Windows, Sean and Jeff Green and all these guys I looked up to, like when I first got there, I felt like I knew him too. And then, but like it wasn't until like I hung out with Sean at his house and we sat there and talked about like maybe stuff that wasn't video games and stuff that I was like, oh,
right.
Now I'm actually getting to know you. So it's just different, and I hope that I think it's good for people to make that distinction, especially in a world where like people reveal so much of themselves through everything. So
yeah,
it's just like,
and the reality is becoming blurred of what's through the screen and
yeah, like what how much is what people want you to see? It's like, it's just you hear people on Facebook and stuff that are like depressed because they're seeing all their friends doing amazing things all the time, and it's because people only post amazing things.
Right.
So all of a sudden you're like, my life seems fucking inadequate, and it's like, well, no, you're just not,
You're not seeing the weird fights they also have with their significant other,
or when
the days
a family member died, or
right.
et cetera, et cetera. So it's just like,
yeah,
I don't know. That's something I think about a lot as someone who gets emails from people that are both like super positive and like, thanks for doing what you do, and then people who are like, oh my god, I need to tell you about this because only you will understand, and I'm about to kill myself. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
I don't know. I hope I can help you, but
yeah, I bet those kind of emails are the hard ones to, because I know you guys get a lot of emails like that.
Yeah, we do. We get
because people find solace in your show and stuff.
Yeah, it's tough when you deal with stuff like that because you're like, fuck, man, I don't know. Like, I'm under-equipped. I don't know you that well. So, like,
I have my own problems.
I'm like, please go see a therapist because I can't help you. Like, I don't know. So
yeah. Well, Anthony, it's been a great conversation. I won't keep you too much longer. So
yeah. No,
thank you for talking, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. I really enjoyed it.
Right? Wasn't that great? Anthony was a great guest. I feel like there was a connection there, the kind you get when interviewing someone and things go well. So I enjoyed our conversation. And we didn't really mention it during the show, but, check out all his stuff, Play Marvel Heroes. Support the Comedy Button on Patreon. As I mentioned during our conversation, it's one of my favorite podcasts. It's up there. Top 3, I'll say, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's very, very funny, and sometimes they can get very heartfelt and profound as well. So go support that on Patreon or listen to it for free. I implore you. All right, so next week, who knows who's on the show? Because that's something that's still being worked on. So hopefully we'll have a great guest next week. If not, I'll be around. Right now the show's on a rotating kind of irregular schedule, and that's fine. I'm still trying to do it weekly, but if not, that's the way the cookie crumbles, as some people like to say. All right, so to keep up with the podcast and to figure out what's going on with it, you can like it on Facebook, Butterfly Effect Podcast. Subscribe on YouTube if that's how you want to listen to it, Butterfly Effect Podcast. Follow on Twitter, Butterfly Pod. You can follow me on Twitter. That's probably the best place to keep up with everything. At Edeltodd, ETTLETODD. And you can listen to the show on Spreaker. I'm trying to get people to subscribe on iTunes because that's good. iTunes is easy for most people. Just search Butterfly Effect Podcast and you should find it. And you can email me with suggestions for guests, feedback, what have you, at trettleman@gmail.com, trettleman@gmail.com. And I think that takes care of all the business. I hope to see you next week. If not, like I said, I'll be around. Thanks for listening. See you later.